Okay, so what we're going to do now is some very short, sharp presentations. We've got 3 people going to stand up. We challenged them to 15 minutes each, but it looks like they're going to get 10 minutes each. So 10 minutes each, and so we got 3 subjects. First up is Dr. Zara Whysall, who is our Head of Products and Research, discussing where should internal communications sit. Then she'll be followed by Dominic Mahony, talking about message passing and getting people to care. And then lastly, Swain is going to talk about the importance of influencing for communicators. So 3 short, sharp, 10-minute sessions, and then we'll go for lunch. They'll just come one after another. I'm not going to come up in between. So this will take us through to lunch. So first up is Zara. Thank you very much.
I'd like to start, though, not thinking about where IC should sit, but where it does sit. Here comes the spotlight. So what I'd like to do is to just set the context by asking, if you wouldn't mind, to raise your hand as I go through the options of where IC currently sits in your organisation, so that we can just get a feel for the diversity that we have in the room. So could you just raise your hand if, for you in your organisation, IC sits within HR, perhaps in the HR function? Okay. I'm sure for others it fits in corporate comms. Yeah, okay. Maybe for some of you are in marketing? A few? Do some of you have an independent internal comms function, perhaps? A few. Okay, well, let's not go through all of the options, but clearly this just reinforces the fact that IC sits in a various of different locations. The second question I'd quickly like to put to you in terms of context setting is, how many of you feel that the current location of internal comms in your organisation is the optimal location for it? Raise your hand if you think that is the case. A few. So that's good news. But for those of you that didn't raise your hand there, hopefully you'll be reassured by the first proposition that I'd like to put out there, which is actually, it doesn't matter where internal comms sits, necessarily. Of course, what matters is how it's used and the extent to which it enables people and performance. The caveat, though, is that the former can influence the latter. So where it sits doesn't necessarily need to, but can influence its effectiveness. So I'd like to frame this discussion around that, and to do that we need to think about what are the factors that influence the effectiveness of internal comms as a function. So I'd like to just move to these 7 critical success factors. And you'll find more detail on these in the white paper in the middle of your tables. They came out of some work that we did about a year ago. And it was a combination of activities. First of all, we reviewed the research literature, my background being research, of course I'd do that. But also we hosted a round table and some subsequent interviews with internal comms professionals, but also business leaders and HR professionals as well, with an internal comms remit. And in combining all of those perspectives, we identified these 7 factors. Now, clearly I haven't got time to go through all of them today, so I'm just going to focus on 3. And the 3 that seem most relevant to the topic of where should internal comms sit. So, first of all then, of course it's important for internal comms to have both broad and deep connectivity across the organisation. And that's because communications is the lifeblood of an organisation. So it's good for internal comms to sit right at the heart of that. Ideally, with direct representation on the exec team, so that you're there, to shape the strategy and the messages that flow from it right from the start. But at the same time, of course, you need to have your finger on the pulse at the broader extremities of the organisation, and we've heard from others about that already today. So to know what's going on in the further flung reaches of the organisation. Now, whilst location can influence the actual connectivity that you have at these different extremes, it doesn't necessarily need to. And even if it doesn't actually influence your literal connectivity, it can influence the perceived connectivity that you have, the extent to which those leaders perceive that you understand their worlds at those different extremes. And the reason that that's important, that perception, of course, is that not only do you need to get in front of these people, but you need to influence them once you're there. And Austin's going to speak more about influence in the 3rd spotlight session. But I just want to focus in on credibility, the credibility aspect of influencing. And of course, coming back to the list, there's a number of factors that influence credibility. And one of those is the second in the list, so impartiality. To what extent are you perceived to be impartial? But also the strong commercial awareness, which is something that Fiona spoke about earlier as well. And that's because credibility isn't just about understanding the tools and tactics of communication, but it's about that strong business acumen, so that those leaders really feel that you have a genuine understanding of how their business works and you can speak their language. So it's all of those things too. So to what extent are you in a position to influence at this level? And a question that was raised in the work that we did developing these factors, in speaking with senior internal comms professionals, was that actually it's really at that strategic level where the possibilities lie for adding a significant value. And this is what led Fiona McCann, who we heard from earlier, to state that in her role, she strongly believes that her focus ought to be very much strategic, in fact 70% strategic in comparison to 30% at the tactical level. So it might be interesting to just reflect on the different people within your team and the extent to which they sit on the continuum of strategic to tactical. And also how the location of internal comms affects your ability to influence and the opportunities that you have to influence at those different levels. Okay, so coming back to that network of communicators that you need out there in terms of trying to reach the broader extremities of the organization. Of course, you can't, and internal communications shouldn't be limited to the outputs of the internal comms function alone. So this is about enabling all of those leaders out there in the organization to be effective communicators and to support those messages. Now, of course, it's more than just a carefully crafted email. It's about enabling leaders to have those effective communications that we've heard quite a lot, those conversations that we've heard quite a lot about already today. But it's important, of course, that IC is an enabler rather than a mouthpiece. So right from supporting the executive team in communicating the strategy in a clear and compelling way, right through, as Adrian mentioned, to supporting each and every leader and manager throughout the organization to translate that strategy into something meaningful for their individual teams. And it's those conversations that the internal comms professionals that we spoke to felt can sometimes be overlooked, at least the importance of those leadership conversations can be overlooked. And not only that, but as George mentioned, perhaps some of those leaders aren't exactly comfortable in having the conversations at the level that they really need to have them. So those open, honest conversations. So I've just got a quote here from one of the IC professionals at the round table. I'll just let you read through that yourself. So clearly feeling that there's real opportunity there to support leaders to be as effective communicators as they can be. And so it's worth reflecting on to what extent are you and your team in a position to support leaders in this way? And to what extent do leaders see that as a fundamental part of their role also? Okay, so in beginning to draw all of that together then, what I'm saying is that whilst it doesn't necessarily matter where internal comms sits, it can influence the effectiveness of the function and its outputs, and ultimately what we're getting to being enabling people and performance. Of course, as can organizational specific factors influence the appropriateness of various locations for IC, as I'm sure you're well aware, its priorities, the size of the organization, the geographical spread of employees, all of those factors. But the key message that I'd like to convey is that the important thing is to be aware of the ways in which location can impact on effectiveness, and therefore to deliberately develop your IC strategy around mitigating any potential threats to those success factors whilst maximizing the opportunities. And I think 3 specific points would be useful to reflect on in relation to that, the ones that I've covered. So first of all, to what extent do you have that strong influence, that strong connectedness, both at the executive team level and out at the peripheries of the organization? Do you have a voice at the top table? And do you have a strongly engaged network of leaders out there communicating effectively? But also, to what extent are your activities dominated by the more strategic versus the more tactical type activities? Do you have a spread of focus within the team? And to what extent does your location influence the opportunities that you have at those different levels? Is it deliberate or is it actually a function of where you sit. And then finally, are you a mouthpiece or an enabler of leadership communication? So are you enabling each and every manager and leader throughout the organisation to be as effective as they can be in their leadership communication, particularly with the emphasis on having those open and honest conversations? Okay, so hopefully what I've achieved in, I think, 10 minutes is to convey at least some food for thought, which you might want to discuss with colleagues in the reflection session after lunch. But other than that, I'd just like to thank you for listening.
Zara has set the bar very high, being exactly 10 minutes. There we go. I will endeavour to pick up her theme of food for thought, because I am the man. I'm not quite the last person to get between you and lunch, but I'm very nearly am. I will also offer you some food for thought, I hope, on the subject of message passing. And my starting point is that whether we are a trusted advisor to a leader within our organisation, or whether we're a leader ourselves, there's only so much that we can achieve with a well-crafted message. There's only so much we can achieve with a well-crafted message. Here's a truism in the communications world, such a truism that I couldn't actually find anyone to attribute it to. If anyone knows, then do let me know at lunchtime. So a truism both in the communications world and in the therapeutic world, in the therapy world, about the difference between our intention and our impact in communication. Those of us who are of the married persuasion will know this to be true at times in our relationships with our loved ones, do we not? And I'm grateful to the cartoonist Wiley, who in his column, Why We'll Never Understand Each Other, makes this point on a regular basis. Husband says something, wife hears something completely different. What she heard whilst cooking is anything less than absolute perfection makes you an utter failure as a wife and mother. What he actually said is, Mum is coming over to dinner. So this gap between what we intend and what impact we have is obviously one of the challenges we have as communicators. And I've been pondering on this, obviously, for many years. It's a challenge that we face on a regular basis. And I was at a conference before Christmas with my colleague Natalie, the CIPR conference. I don't know if anyone else was there, where the opening speaker was a guy called Max McGowan. He's a strategy guy. And in the context of strategy, he simplified everything down to, in organizations, he said, there are doers and there are thinkers. And the doers are all about taking action, getting on with something, trying something. If it doesn't work, try something else. And the thinkers, meanwhile, want to have a little bit of analysis about what's just happened, would like to make sense of that, put a bit of theory to it, maybe do a little bit of concluding before moving on to trying something else. And the provocation that he had, which I thought was useful for us to think about as communicators, is actually maybe our role is about connecting up better the doers and the thinkers within organizations. How might we help connect the doing and the thinking in organizations in order to make sure that what we intend has the impact that we want? And coming from a learning and development, a behavioral development background, of course, I put this together with the work of David Kolb on the learning cycle. You'll be familiar with this quite simple notion about we have an experience. We then reflect on that experience, make sense of that experience, maybe draw some conclusions, put some theories as to why something happened, or go back to an experience we previously had and said, oh, that's why that works, before drawing a conclusion and then experimenting and doing something different. Those of the doing persuasion are more attracted to having the experience and then just getting on and having the next experience. And we can be in a cycle of doing. Those from the thinking, with a thinking preference, would more want to spend time reflecting on what happened and drawing some conclusions about it. So how might we, in trying to connect up the intention with the impact, help people to complete this learning circle, complete this cycle of doing something, reflecting on it, drawing some conclusion, and then planning to do something else. So connecting up this doing and thinking, to connect up intention with impact, to prevent some of the non sequiturs, the kind of what happened there, that happens in organizations when communication doesn't quite work out as we intended. And who, I think, does this well? It's always dangerous, is it not, to put up a leader of an organization? Oh, yes, so I should say. So I guess my provocation, my food for thought over lunch, I'd be interested in your reflections on this, is perhaps what Max was challenging us to do as communications professionals, was to move from thinking about ourselves as internal communicators to thinking of ourselves more as learning communicators. How can we help people to connect up this complete cycle, to learn from what we're doing, rather than just get on and pass the message better next time? Yeah? Help people to make sense. So from internal comms to learning comms, I think he was saying something about that. And coming from that background, it struck a chord with me. And a leader who I think got this. It's always dangerous to put up a leader, isn't it? They either get fired the next week or go off and become the next pope or something like that. But Justin King, I believe he's still the chief executive of Sainsbury's today, and has been there since 2004. He came back into the business in 2004, and you'll see from the share price they were bumping along the bottom at one point, nearly just only above 200 pence. He's obviously led quite a recovery, and it's now sort of bumping along in this zero growth economy at about 3.45, I think it was last night. So he's been there for some time. When he returned to the business, he had a turnaround program which he called Making Sainsbury's Great Again. Those of us colleagues within Lane 4 had the opportunity to work with him and his senior leadership team, the top 1,000 leaders of the business, on that program. And he himself is a very strong communicator, quite a charismatic guy, good at the formal stuff, good at the message passing, but with some good advice, he also took it a lot further than that. So, and this framework, which I'm going to show you, is really about this point about how we get beyond crafting a good message, not knowing actually what impact we'll have, intending through our message to do something, but not knowing what impact we'll have, to actually helping people to make sense of it, so they actually understand what we intend. And he understood this, and this is the work of my colleague Chris Rogers, where he talks about, yes, these are all legitimate channels, if you like, of communication, ways of communication. Yes, we need the management edict. Yes, we need the leader to stand and make a compelling case to his people, to pass the message in a compelling way. He had an infographic. It wasn't called an infographic in 2004, they're that recent, but it was a plan on a page, a single page, and he spoke very compellingly to it, and everyone got that piece of paper and had a chance to make sense of it. So yes, there was that formal communication. There was also a big emphasis on helping leaders, starting with him and his executive team, to make the behavioral changes, the changes that they would need to lead a turnaround in the organization, and above all, to develop some self-confidence that they could do it. So there was a big emphasis amongst the 1,000 leaders, starting with the operations board, and then modeled by them, coming into the sessions that we crafted and ran for them, that was about them being part of the conversation, not just coming along and starting the day and then coming at the end and saying, do you have a good time? But actually being there, sharing the behavioral development, the changes that they were seeking to make, the feedback that they'd received, and modeling that kind of change. And then also there was an emphasis on cross-functional problem solving. If we've got a problem around availability, who do we need to have in the room to sort this out? So there was this kind of message passing and a certain amount of sense making. But so from the very sort of tight and directed to the more flexible ad hoc kind of way of communicating, helping people to understand not just the intention, but also to work with the impact that it was having. And then finally, the bit that I think my colleague Chris really adds to here, and this is one for us as internal communicators, in our advice to leaders as well, is what Chris talks about, the shadow side of the organisation, the grapevine, the water cooler conversations, the corridor conversations, when we bump into someone and we get a bit of a sense of what is the impact of the communication that they're getting. What are they really thinking about what it is that the leaders are saying? And of course this is, we're not in control of this. This is complex, it's self-organizing. It's quite often seen by leaders as being negative, the rumor mill. Crush it, stamp it out, why don't they get it? Yeah? Actually, if they understood that it's a really important feedback loop, it's the water wheel that Adrian was talking about, it's the water coming back up. It tells you what impact you're having. If we as internal communicators fully engage in that in a responsible way, tap into the grapevine and encourage leaders to tap into it too, we can have this extended communication and we can have a greater impact, we can have a greater chance of our intention, the impact that we have being that we intended. And avoiding the non sequiturs that I suggested earlier on, and which I experienced with my own wife just the other day, when getting dressed in the morning to go to the same business meeting, she said to me, are the people we're meeting today smart? To which I replied, well, they are executives from the UK's premier science and technology-based company. Most of them have got PhD. Yes, they're very smart. To which she said, no, Dominic, do I need to wear a suit? Thank you.